Hello everyone, I welcome you to CEC lecture series. I'm Nupur Chawla, teaching English literature at Maitri College, Delhi University. Now this lecture is part of the ongoing series on 20th century poetry, and this is the second part of the lecture on Robert Frost. Now in the previous lecture we had looked at the personal details of Robert Frost's lives. We also connected that to the kind of writing that we witness by the poet, and then we shared that how one of his very important poems from a short story from a poetry collection called the New Hampshire, which was published in 1923. We took that up for discussion, and the poem is titled The Boundless Moment. So in the previous lecture, we looked at or had an overview of what is it that Frost is doing in that particular poem. And now in this lecture, we are going to revisit each stanza and then understand that what exactly is it that Robert Frost does in all the three stanzas of this particular poem, right? Now, let's look at the first stanza. It says, "He halted in the wind, and what was that? Far in the maples, pale, but not a ghost. He stood there bringing march against his thought, and yet too early to believe the most." So the foremost thing that we say is that the poem begins with a reference to he. He halted in the wind. Now who is he? He refers to the traveler. He halted. Halted, again, stopped. So he was on the move and then he stopped, and it says he halted in the wind. So right at the outset, what we notice is that there's a reference to wind blowing, and it transports the reader right amidst nature, somewhere in the woods, right? Because it says he halted in the wind, and what was that? Far in the maples, pale but not a ghost. Now maples, as you all know, that it is a particular tree which is I would say native to the cold western countries, and the leaves they change beautiful colors in different seasons. So therefore when it says far in the maples, so there are multiple maples there. It's not one maple tree, but quite a few of them. So this reference, far in the maples, then tells us that the traveler is somewhere in the woods, right? Now the next thing is that he is unsure of what sight indicates or what the particular sight that he comes across stands for or indicates. What is it that he's seeing, right? And he stands gazing at it, trying to make sense of it. But one thing is certain to him, that it is not a ghost. It says far in the maples pale, but not a ghost. What was that? Far in the maples pale, but not a ghost. Now, the next thing that catches our attention is a reference to the ghost, right? So he says that there is something in the trees, in the maples. It is pale, but it's not a ghost. Now, you see, it's important for us to go into the implications of this image of the ghost, which is evoked by Robert Frost. First thing that we can say is that the word ghost gives us an insight into the individual's mind. A reference to the ghosts evokes ideas of fear and uncertainty. Now, when you call something ghostly or when you refer to the ghost, there are certain obvious associations which come to your mind. One of them is fear, the other is uncertainty. because ghost is not of this world, right? It's not a material reality. So we see that there is a kind of a mood which is created by this reference right at the beginning of the poem, right? And therefore one can say that this mood could be a reflection of the individual's mind as well. So therefore we say that, such a state of mind makes the traveler think of ghost, the state of mind of uncertainty, fear, etc. This brings to mind the idea of ghost, even though in negation. Negation, why? Because a poet says it was pale but not a ghost, and a question mark, right? Now you see, you might wonder that why is this preoccupation with the phantasm figure? The other thing that we can therefore say is that while it kind of reflects the state of mind of the individual, but at the same time it can possibly be a reflection also of the crisis and the general mood post the First World War, right? Now whether it is a reflection of the individual's fearful state of mind or an indicator of that which is difficult to make sense of, the poem does not make it clear. Instead, it adds to the mystery of this sight. And I would say that, this is where Robert Frost's credo also lies, right? Now, further in the stanza, we see that the traveler stands there, and I quote, bringing march against his thought, and yet too ready to believe the most, unquote. Now, having noticed that there is, a vision which is intriguing but which is unclear, next, the poetic voice says, bringing march against his thought, and yet too ready to believe the most. Now, of course, we understand that the word March refers to the month of March, right? So maybe we can say that here the poet tries to fathom what that vision could actually be, keeping in mind the fact that it was perhaps the month of March. That what is it that one notices in nature? What are the changes that we notice in nature during the month of March? The traveler starts to think along those lines. So thinking of that, then he wonders, okay, let us take a guess that what is it that happens in nature during the month of March, and that would give us a clue into what lies ahead. So it says, it seems as if standing there, the individual considered all the possibilities that nature opens in the month of March, right? So now I hope that you understand what this reference means, that is bringing March against his thought, right? Now you see, even though he questions, tries hard to make sense of the present using his own faculties, but what does the poet say? And I quote, and yet he was too ready to believe the most, unquote. Now here we notice an interplay of independent thought and submission. Again, two opposites coming together, right? Why independent thought? Because he's questioning, he's thinking, what is it that he sees? So questioning is directly connected with independent thought. But at the same time, the poetic voice says, and yet he was too ready to believe the most. What does this mention? What does this indicate? That the person was ready to believe what he was told. Which means what? Submission, acceptance. So independent thought and submission, two very opposite qualities or entities, come together right at the outset of the poem itself, right? Now one can think Why is it, or one can ask, why is it that Robert Frost brings these two very opposite qualities of being human together? Could this be a result of a fearful state of mind? Now you see, questioning and submission, the two opposite but essential human traits, therefore, are beautifully juxtaposed in this stanza. Now, again, taking you back to the first part of the lecture, remember what we had discussed, that how nature is used for a purpose. And the purpose in this particular poem seems to be to think about or to bring alive certain important questions about human life. And here we see the first question coming up, which is what? The comparison, or one can say the reference to a questioning mind and a mind which submits easily. So Robert Frost seems to be asking that is it the either or? That either you can be questioning or you can be submitting, or can you alternate between the two, right? So by extension, these are some of the points that Robert Frost raises in the first stanza. Now let us come to the second stanza. It says, and I'll very quickly read out the second stanza. Oh, that the paradise in bloom. Oh, that's the paradise in bloom, I said. And truly, it was fair enough for flowers, had we but in us to assume in March such white luxuriance of May for ours. Now, if the first stanza of the poem raises the question, we can see that in the second stanza, the other traveller replies. He says, oh, that is the paradise in bloom. He tries to give an answer to what is it that the vision is about. He says it seems to be a paradise in bloom. In bloom means, a set of flowers or a bunch of flowers, right? That's the paradise in bloom, I said, and truly it was fair enough for flowers, had we but in us to assume in March such white luxuriance of May for ours. It says that the time was perfect for flowers, but then it says only if we had in us to assume in March the white luxuriance of May for ours. So on the one hand, he says that the time was perfect for the blooming of the flowers, but then on the other hand, he also says that only if we had in us to assume in March the luxuriance of May. Once again, doing what? Laying emphasis on the individual's mental makeup. What we perceive is a result of the thoughts that we have. That's what Robert Frost seems to be suggesting in the second stanza. So we can say that the poet takes forward the idea of human agency to interpret the surroundings. It begins by the insertion, oh, that is the paradise in bloom. So the human being makes the choice to interpret, to understand, to make sense of the surroundings. Right? And that's why from this tendency comes this assertion, oh, that's the paradise in bloom. Right? Now we see that these words are uttered by the second traveller, who is referred to as I, the one who is more optimistic than he in the first. Now you see in the first stanza, we do not see any optimism. We see only doubt, uncertainty, fear. In the second stanza, the second traveller says, oh, it could be the paradise in bloom, which means what? That the second traveller, which is referred to as I in the second stanza, seems to be slightly different from the traveller in the first one. Now you see, here you must ask the question that what is the significance of the word paradise? Paradise in bloom. Why couldn't he just say flowers in bloom? Why did the poet say paradise in bloom? Is there a significance to it? So one can say that, at one level, paradise here is in sharp contrast to the description of the vision in the first stanza, where it is pale, right? Pale, something which is dull, something which is not bright, and of course paradise, quite on the contrary, is something which is desirable, right? So we see that the two opposite images then represent or can represent the different responses of the two travelers to the very same sight in the woods. So one calls it a paradise in bloom and the other calls it a pale ghost. So they are observing the same thing, but they are saying two different things about it, right? A third thing that we can also say is that paradise refers to the human ability to imagine an ideal state, envision a favorable circumstance which may not be immediately realizable in the present. That's a third implication of the word paradise, right? That it's the human ability to imagine an ideal state, because we all know paradise is ideal. It's that situation which humans always aspire to, right? It's that, one can say, locale, it's that setting that human beings aspire to. It is an ideal state, right? So one can say, therefore, that paradise here can be a symbol of an ideal condition or favorable circumstances, which may not be immediately evident or realizable, but somewhere in the future one could work for them. So maybe this is what the travelers have on mind when they see the unknown vision as a paradise in bloom. So this tells us that perhaps the second traveler has a hope that while the current or the present may not be as palatable, may not be as easy, may not have all the answers right now, but well, it's a paradise in bloom. It will be realized in the future, right? Now, the fourth thing that we say about this word is that the vision as a paradise in bloom is an assertion also of human ability to envision an alternative to the current unpalatable present. Now, the unpalatable present is created in the opening paragraph, where it says that it's a pale ghost. Now, in the second paragraph, it says it's a paradise in bloom. So, perhaps this is here Robert Frost is pointing towards the assertion of human ability to envision an alternative to the current unpalatable present, that a better alternative is possible. So perhaps that's why he is using the word paradise. A third thing that we also say is that there is this contrast between the two voices in the poem, right? The first says that the unknown sight is not a ghost, and the second voice sees it as if as a bunch of white flowers in bloom, right? Then he goes on to say, only, so this is a paradise only, had we in us to assume in March such white luxuriance of May. He says that this could be a paradise, this could be, one can say that a paradise in bloom, but flowers here symbolize beauty and optimism, qualities which are essential to human existence, but which often get clouded during difficult times, difficult situations. So maybe one can say that this is the second role of nature in Robert Frost's poetry, that it seems to counteract the heaviness of life. It seems to make us reflect on the important questions of life. When we notice or when we observe different elements of nature close enough, by means of association, such questions come to the fore, right? And at the same time, we also see that, there's a sense of optimism which comes up when we notice the beauty in nature, right? And this optimism then helps an individual during the difficult time. So this could perhaps be the second relevance of nature in Robert Frost's poems. Now, a third thing that we say is that, when he says that, had we in us to assume in March white luxuriance of May, this assertion can also be about having a perspective that is forward-looking. Had we in us to assume in March white luxuriance of May. Now you see, March as a month comes before May. Now white luxuriance over here refers to, a bundle of flowers or a big bunch of flowers blooming, white flowers blooming in May. He says if we had it in us to envision, the coming of May, well, yes, then in that case, this what we saw could be nothing but those beautiful flowers which grow in May. But only it required us to have that mindset, to think in March that it is May, or one can say to think during a difficult time that yes, there is an answer. So you see, Robert Frost is not a poet who is hopeless. No matter he is writing at a time when such is the atmosphere, but he comes with an exception. So we see here that the poet reiterates that this is possible only if, and I quote, we had we in us, thereby challenging the individual to develop or nurture the essential traits of positive foresight, right? A third important philosophical feature in this poem. Okay, from here we move to the discussion of the last stanza, which says, we stood a moment so in a strange world, myself as one his own pretense deceives. And then I said the truth, and we moved on. A young beech clinging to its last year's leaves. Now you see, towards the end, that mystery is kind of resolved. What is it that they were seeing? It was a young beech. Beech is a, it's a deciduous tree which was clinging to its last year's leaves. Once again, a very beautiful philosophical point is conveyed here. We will come to that in just a bit. And that's the truth that the poet says. All the questioning, all the doubting that was going on in the poem, towards the end is resolved, right? So the last stanza we see that combines the two voices that now become we, okay? And after these ruminations, the poet reflects that the two individuals denoted by we stood in the situation with thoughts which were described in the first and the second stanzas, right? Now the speaker in the poem then describes himself as one whose own pretense is not so strong and it deceives. Now what is the pretense? What is this pretense that is being talked about? Perhaps it refers to the projection that he understands everything, right? Now the speaker is, constantly sending googlies to the reader. On the one hand, he says that, okay, I don't understand what is out there. Perhaps it could be a paradise in bloom. Then he says, well, maybe I'm deceiving. Maybe this is a pretense, right? That I know everything, but maybe I don't know everything. So what is he doing? He's playing with the idea of cognition, with the idea of understanding. That sometimes we might think that we understand, but actually, do we understand? Or is it only a pretense, or are we pretending to understand? So once again, raising a question on meaning making in life, on understanding in life, which doesn't always come easy, right? So that's why he says that perhaps I was deceiving. This was a pretense that I understand what is that image, right? So then one can say that all that he pretends to say initially in the poem is then towards the end called to question. Thereafter he says, and then I said the truth, as if all of what he had said before was a mere pretense. But it's only afterwards he says the truth. He expresses the truth, spells it out clearly, and the two travelers, they move on. Now, what truth is it? Whose truth is it? What does it indicate? All these questions immediately come up in the reader's mind. But the poem does not provide any answers. The only thing that we get to know is that what they saw was a young beech clinging to the last year's leaves. It was a tree that had not shed its old leaves, much against its natural course. Now you see, a beech is a deciduous tree, as I just now mentioned, known for its characteristic feature of shedding parts of its foliage on maturing. However, the vision created by the poet in this poem is opposite. It is a beech which is holding on to its leaves. It's not letting it go, right? So symbolically then one can say that the tree represents a third aspect of human nature, which is the ability to renew, rethink and reinvent oneself, and hence the symbol of the beech. But the given tree had not shed its leaves, even though it was its nature to shed the leaves, to renew, to reinvent, but it was holding on. And therefore, it became a subject of curiosity or careful observation. Right? So, with this, we say that, these are some of the important philosophical aspects that Robert Frost raises in this very short poem. And I think that that's where the beauty of this poem also lies. Only 3 short stanzas, and yet such thought-provoking ideas are evoked by Robert Frost using his representation of nature. So I'm sure that you're now also going to look at other poems by Robert Frost and get a sense of the greatness of this poet. Thank you.